The red dust of the Santa Fe Trail hung in the air like ground cinnamon, coating everything in sight with its rusty film. Rosalie Quinn pressed a worn handkerchief to her nose as the stagecoach lurched to a stop at the Silver Arroyo relay station. Through the grimy window, she could see the ramshackle buildings wavering in the afternoon heat, their pine boards bleached gray by the relentless New Mexico sun. "End of the line. Miss," the driver called down. "This here's your stop." Rose gathered her meager belongings, a carpet bag containing 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, and the deed to a worthless plot of land her father had left her. At 23, she owned nothing else in the world except her tarnished reputation. The other passengers gave her a wide berth as she descended from the coach. Word traveled faster than horses in these parts, and everyone knew why Thomas Edison's former fiancée had broken their engagement after 2 years. "Barren as the desert," they whispered. "Poor thing can't give a man children." The relay station buzzed with activity. Merchants hawked their wares, cowboys changed horses, and in the corner of the yard, a group of men huddled around a makeshift table where money changed hands with the speed of lightning. Miss Quinn, a thin man in a dusty suit, approached her, mopping his brow. "I'm Samuel Morse, representing the interests of your late father's creditors." Rose straightened her spine. "Mr. Morse, I wasn't expecting you so soon." "Well now, debts don't wait for mourning periods, I'm afraid." He produced a ledger, running his finger down columns of numbers. "Your father owed Mr. William Hurst here considerable sums, gambling debts, mostly." A heavy-set man stepped forward, gold teeth glinting. Hurst looked her up and down like she was horseflesh at auction. $300. That's what your daddy owed me." "I don't have $300, Rose said quietly. Now, Morse interjected with an oily smile. "Mr. Hurst has graciously agreed to an alternative arrangement. He needs a wife for his nephew visiting from back east, a respectable woman to help establish his household here in the territory." Rose felt the blood drain from her face. "You mean to sell me like property?" "It's a business arrangement," Hurst said. "Better than debtor's prison, wouldn't you say?" The crowd of onlookers grew, their faces a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. Rose's hands trembled as she clutched her carpetbag tighter. "The lady said she doesn't have your money." The voice came from behind her, deep and steady as bedrock. Rose turned to see a man leading a string of horses into the yard, tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of sage. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. "This ain't your concern, Cole Maddox," Hurst growled. "The woman's father owed me fair and square." Cole tied his horses to the hitching post with deliberate slowness. "Maybe so, but selling folks to pay debts went out of fashion with the war." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. "300, you said—" "Now wait just a minute," Morse started. 300. Cole counted out the bills onto the barrel that served as Morse's desk. "Paid in full. Write up a receipt." Hurst's face flushed purple. "You think you're buying yourself a woman, Maddox?" "I'm not buying anything except a clear conscience." Cole's hand rested casually on his gun belt. "The lady's free to go where she pleases. Though if she's looking for honest work, I could use a hand at the ranch. My sister and I have been managing alone since the smallpox took our cook." Rose found her voice. I can't accept charity, Mr. Maddox." "It's not charity if you're working for it." He studied her with those sage green eyes. "Can you cook?" "Yes. Handle horses." "I was raised on a farm." "Then it's settled. $1 a day plus room and board, if you're willing. San Miguel Ranch, 5 miles north of here." Morse scribbled out the receipt with poor grace while Hurst stalked away, muttering curses. The crowd began to disperse. Though Rose caught more than a few speculative glances, a single woman going to work for a bachelor rancher, the gossips would feast on that for weeks. Why? Rose asked quietly, as Cole tucked the receipt into his pocket. Because Hurst's a snake who's been squeezing folks dry for years. And because, he paused, choosing his words carefully, because everyone deserves a chance to stand on their own feet. A commotion near the telegraph office drew their attention. A well-dressed man in a silk vest was addressing a growing crowd, his voice carrying across the yard. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring news of progress the Atchison. Topeka and Santa Fe Railway will soon extend through this very valley. Imagine direct rail service to Chicago. Your land values will triple overnight. That's Baron John Rockefeller, Cole said quietly. Calls himself an investment facilitator. Him and Sheriff Cornelius Vanderbilt have been thick as thieves lately, buying up water rights. The railroad could bring prosperity. Rose ventured, could bring a lot of things. Cole's jaw tightened. Prosperity for some, ruin for others. Depends on which side of the tracks you're standing on. As if summoned by his name, Sheriff Vanderbilt emerged from the saloon, his star glinting in the harsh sunlight. He was a big man gone to fat, with small, mean eyes that missed nothing. Maddox, he called out. Heard you were in town. We need to discuss that north pasture of yours. The railroad's going to need a right-of-way. We've discussed it already. The answer's still no. Vanderbilt's hand dropped to his gun. Now that's not very civic-minded of you. Neither is forcing folks off their land. Cole's voice remained steady, but Rose noticed the tension in his shoulders. You want to talk. You know where to find me, but the answer won't change. The sheriff's eyes shifted to Rose, and his thick lips curved in an unpleasant smile. Who's your friend? My new housekeeper, Miss Quinn, Sheriff Vanderbilt. Quinn, Thomas Quinn's daughter. The one who... His grin widened. Well, Maddox, you always did have a soft spot for strays? Rose's cheeks burned. But before she could respond, a young girl came running through the crowd, no more than 12, with Cole's same dark hair but fierce brown eyes. She skidded to a stop beside them. Cole Benedict needs you. One of the brood mares is down. June, mind your manners, Cole said gently. This is Miss Quinn. She'll be helping us out at the ranch. June's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Another one they never stay. June? It's all right, Rose interrupted. She has a right to be cautious. I'm not planning on going anywhere. June, not if your brother will have me. The girl studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. Can you make biscuits? Cole's taste like horseshoes. Despite everything? Rose found herself smiling. I can make biscuits. Then I guess you'll do. June turned to her brother. We need to go. Benedict's real worried. Cole nodded, then looked at Rose. You need time to get your affairs in order. These are my affairs. She lifted her carpet bag. All of them. Then we'd best get moving. Storm coming in from the west, and we want to beat it home. As they loaded her bag onto Cole's wagon, Rose caught sight of her reflection in the general store window. Dust-covered and travel-worn, she hardly recognized herself. The woman who'd been prepared to marry Edison, to be a proper wife in a proper home, was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who had no idea what tomorrow would bring. They were 3 miles out of town, the horses maintaining a steady pace despite the weight of the wagon, when Rose finally asked, Who's Benedict? One of the young ones, Cole replied, his eyes on the darkening horizon. We've got 3 besides June Benedict, Grace and little Abraham, orphans from the smallpox outbreak last winter. Couldn't see them sent to the territorial home. That's very kind of you. He shrugged. Kindness has nothing to do with it. Out here, we take care of our own. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and something else, the acrid smell of burning wood. In the distance, a column of smoke rose against the purple sky. Fire, June said, standing up in the wagon bed. Looks like the old Whitman place. Cole urged the horses faster. Could be lightning. Could be something else. As they crested a rise, the full scope of the fire became visible. A homestead was ablaze, the flames already consuming the barn and licking at the main house. But it was the figures silhouetted against the fire that made Rose's blood run cold. Men on horseback, whooping and firing their guns into the air. "Get down," Cole ordered, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "Both of you, get down now!" Rose pulled June below the wagon's sides, her heart hammering. The girl's face was pale but determined. "Los Mudos," June whispered. "The Silent Ones. They've been raiding since the drought started." A coyote howled in the distance. Or maybe it was one of the raiders. Rose held June tighter, remembering her father's old hunting rifle and the hours he'd spent teaching her to shoot. She'd been a good shot once, before propriety demanded she put away such unladylike pursuits. Cole had dismounted, using the wagon for cover as he watched the raiders. His face was grim in the firelight. "They're moving on. We'll wait until they're gone. Then see if anyone needs help." But as the raiders wheeled their horses around, one of them spotted the wagon. He shouted to his companions, pointing their direction. "The rifle!" Rose said urgently. "Give me the rifle." Cole looked at her sharply. "You know how to use it?" "My father taught me." He handed it over without another word. The weight was familiar in her hands, comfortable in a way her needlework never had been. She sighted down the barrel, adjusting for wind and distance. The raiders were coming fast, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. Rose waited, breathing steady, just like her father taught her. When the lead rider was within range, she squeezed the trigger. The shot took his hat clean off, sending it spinning into the sage. The rider yanked his horse around, shouting to the others. Rose chambered another round, fired again. This time she put a hole through their leader's water bag, sending a spray of precious liquid onto the ground. The message was clear. "I could have killed you." The raiders milled about for a moment, then turned and rode hard in the opposite direction, their howls fading into the night. Cole took the rifle back, his expression unreadable. Where did a farmer's daughter learn to shoot like that? "My father said a woman alone needs to be able to protect herself." Rose's hands were shaking now, adrenaline making her voice unsteady. "I haven't fired a gun in 3 years. Not since—" She stopped, unwilling to finish. Not since Edison told her it was unbecoming for his future wife. "Well, I'm grateful you remembered how." Cole climbed back onto the wagon seat. "Though I'd appreciate it if you'd keep that particular skill quiet once we reach the ranch. No need to spook the children." They found no survivors at the Whitman place. The family had fled or been taken, leaving only charred timber and the bitter taste of smoke. Cole said a brief prayer over the ruins while June collected what few unburned items might be salvaged for the family if they returned. By the time they reached San Miguel Ranch, full dark had fallen. The house materialized from the shadows, a modest adobe structure with a pitched roof and wide porch. Light spilled from the windows, warm and welcoming after the horrors they'd witnessed. 3 children burst from the door as the wagon rolled to a stop. The oldest, a boy of about 10 with sandy hair, looked worried. "Cole, the mare's still down. I've been walking her like you showed me, but—" "It's all right, Benedict," Cole said, climbing down. "Let me see to Miss Quinn, and then we'll check on her. Grace, Abraham, this is Miss Quinn. She'll be staying with us." The middle child, a girl of perhaps 7, studied Rose with solemn dark eyes. The youngest, a boy no more than 4, hid behind his sister's skirts. "Are you here to marry Cole?" Grace asked bluntly. "Grace!" June scolded, but Rose knelt down to the girl's level. "No," she said gently. "I'm here to help with the cooking and the house, and maybe, if you'd like, I could teach you your letters." Abraham peeked out from behind his sister. "Can you make pie?" "I can make pie." His face lit up. "Then you can stay." Despite everything, the confrontation in town, the payment that had bought her freedom, the raiders and the burning homestead, Rose found herself laughing. It burst from her like water from a dam, surprising in its genuine warmth. Cole's expression softened as he watched her with the children. "June, show Miss Quinn to the back room. It's not much, but it's private. I'll see to the mare." The room was indeed small, but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a cross on the whitewashed wall. Someone had placed a jar of wildflowers on the windowsill, June's doing, Rose suspected, despite the girl's initial wariness. As she unpacked her few belongings, Rose could hear Cole's low voice from the barn, soothing the distressed mare. Through the window, she watched him work, patient and gentle, despite the long, difficult day. June held a lantern while Benedict fetched water and Grace sang softly to calm the animal. This was her life now, not the comfortable marriage she'd planned, not the children she'd never bear, but something else entirely, something that felt, despite all logic, like the first real choice she'd ever made. The wind picked up again, rattling the windows and bringing the scent of rain, but inside the thick adobe walls of San Miguel Ranch, with the sound of children's voices and the soft nickering of horses, Rose Quinn finally allowed herself to hope that she might have found something better than the life she'd lost. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She had no illusions about that. Sheriff Vanderbilt and Baron Rockefeller wouldn't give up easily. The railroad was coming whether folks wanted it or not. And somewhere out in the dark, Los Mudos waited for their next opportunity. But tonight, as the first drops of rain began to fall, washing the dust from the air and bringing the promise of growing things, Rose pulled her mother's Bible from her bag and set it on the dresser. She wouldn't read it, hadn't been able to, since the words "be fruitful and multiply" began to feel like a curse. But its presence was a comfort, a reminder that she came from somewhere, even if she didn't yet know where she was going. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. June stood in the doorway, a bundle of fabric in her arms. "Thought you might need these," the girl said, not quite meeting her eyes. "They were our mother's. Cole's been saving them for someone who might need them." Rose accepted the dress's practical calico, well made and only slightly faded. "Thank you, June, that's very kind." June shrugged, but Rose caught the hint of a smile. "Benedict says the mare's going to be fine. Cole's got the touch with animals, with people too, I guess." She paused at the door. "You really meant it about staying." "I meant it." "Good. Abraham's already planning what kind of pie he wants." With that, she was gone, leaving Rose alone with her thoughts and the sound of rain on the roof. As she changed into one of the donated dresses, Rose caught sight of something carved into the windowsill initials and a date. E.M. 1882. Eleanor Maddox. Maybe. Cole and June's mother. Another woman who had made this place a home, who had raised children and weathered storms and perhaps faced down raiders of her own. Rose traced the letters with her finger, making a silent promise to the woman who'd come before. She would earn this sanctuary. She would prove herself worthy of the chance Cole Maddox had given her. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to build a life that was about more than what her body could or couldn't do. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. But inside the house, all was quiet, except for the soft murmur of voices as Cole tucked the younger children into bed. Rose could hear him telling them a story about a brave cowboy and his faithful horse, his voice rising and falling in familiar rhythms. Tomorrow she would start earning her keep. She would cook and clean and mend. She would teach the children their letters and help June with the heavy work. She would face down the suspicious looks of the townspeople and the inevitable gossip about the barren woman living with the bachelor rancher. But tonight, listening to the rain and the peaceful sounds of a family settling in for the night, Rosalie Quinn allowed herself one moment of pure, unexpected contentment. She had been saved from one fate only to choose another, and while she didn't yet know where this path would lead, She knew with bone-deep certainty that it was hers to walk. The candle flickered in a sudden draft, casting dancing shadows on the wall. Rose blew it out and lay back on the narrow bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. Through the thin walls, she could hear Cole's footsteps as he made his final rounds, checking locks and banking the fire. A good man, she thought. A careful man who took in strays and orphans, who stood up to sheriffs and railroad barons, who paid debts that weren't his to pay. She owed him more than $300. She owed him her freedom, her dignity, her chance at a different kind of life. And Rosalie Quinn always paid her debts. The pine boards of the ranch house creaked under Rose's feet as she made her way to the kitchen before dawn. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival at San Miguel Ranch, and she'd learned that Cole rose with the first hint of light, expecting coffee ready and biscuits in the oven. The kitchen was her domain now. She'd scrubbed years of bachelor neglect from every surface, organized the larder, and mended the torn curtains that June had been meaning to fix when she got around to it. The children had taken to gathering at the worn oak table each morning, drawn by the smell of fresh bread and the quiet way Rose listened to their chatter. This morning, however, she found Cole already there, staring out the window at the parched landscape beyond. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his coffee cup sat untouched on the table. "The well's dropping," he said without turning. "Another foot since yesterday." Rose poured herself coffee from the pot, noting how he'd made it too strong again. "How bad?" "Bad enough, if this drought doesn't break soon." He didn't need to finish. She'd seen what happened to ranches without water. "I'm thinking of taking the herd up to the high pastures near Black Mesa. There's still grass there, and a spring that's never run dry." "That's Apache territory," Rose said carefully, "and Los Mudos have been seen in those hills." Cole turned to face her, a wry smile touching his lips. "Didn't take you long to learn the lay of the land. I listen when folks talk at the general store." She began mixing biscuit dough, her movements efficient. "Mary Todd at the Mercantile says you're crazy to stay out here. Says smart ranchers are selling to the railroad while they can still get something." "Mary Todd says a lot of things." Cole watched her work, noting the easy way she handled the kitchen now. "What do you say?" Rose considered as she rolled out the dough. "I say a man who takes in orphans and pays strangers' debts isn't likely to abandon his land at the first sign of trouble. Might be the smart thing to do. Since when have you been concerned with doing the smart thing?" That drew a genuine laugh from him, the first she'd heard in days. "Fair point." Benedict burst through the door, Abraham on his heels. "Cole, Charlotte's foaling. June sent me to fetch you." Cole grabbed his hat. "Rose, can you—" "Go," she said. "I'll bring coffee and food to the barn when it's ready." He paused at the door. "The gray mare's been laboring too long. Might need an extra pair of hands if things go bad." "Then you'll have them." An hour later, Rose carried a tray to the barn, Grace helping with the coffee pot. They found a scene of controlled chaos. Charlotte, a beautiful bay mare, was down in the straw, her sides heaving. Cole knelt beside her, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the morning coolness. June held the mare's head, whispering soothing words. "Breech," Cole said tightly. "I've got to turn it." Rose set down the tray and rolled up her sleeves. "What do you need?" "Hold her head with June. Keep her calm. Benedict, more light. Grace, take Abraham back to the house." "But I want to watch," Abraham protested. "Mind, Cole," Rose said firmly. "Grace, there's fresh cookies in the jar. You and Abraham can have 2 each if you go now." That did the trick. As the younger children scampered off, Rose took her position by Charlotte's head. The mare's eyes rolled with pain and fear. "Easy, girl," Rose murmured, stroking the sweat-dampened neck. "Easy now. Cole's going to help your baby." For the next hour, they worked in tense silence broken only by the mare's labored breathing and Cole's soft encouragement. Rose had seen plenty of animals born on her father's farm, but never with such difficulty. When the foal finally slid free, wet and perfect, she felt tears prick her eyes. "It's not breathing," June said, panic edging her voice. Cole was already rubbing the foal vigorously with straw, clearing its airways. For a moment that stretched like eternity, nothing happened. Then the tiny creature shuddered, sneezed, and drew its first breath. "There we go," Cole said softly. "There's a fighter." The foal was a filly, coal-black with a white star on her forehead, as Charlotte nosed her baby, nickering softly. Rose found herself thinking about all the life she'd never create, but watching this new life take its first wobbling steps. She felt something ease in her chest. Creation took many forms. "She's beautiful," June said, grinning wider than Rose had ever seen. "What should we name her?" "That's Rose's honor," Cole said, surprising them all. She kept Charlotte calm when it mattered most. Rose studied the filly as she nursed, already showing the spirit that would serve her well in this harsh land. "Hope," she said finally. "Let's call her Hope." They were cleaning up when Sheriff Vanderbilt arrived with 2 deputies. Rose recognized one as Jesse James, a young man with cruel eyes who'd made unwelcome advances at the general store. The other was new to her, a thin fellow with nervous hands. "Maddox," Vanderbilt called from the yard. "Need a word." Cole stepped out of the barn, Rose and June behind him. "Sheriff, bit early for social calls." "This ain't social." Vanderbilt produced a paper from his vest. "Official assessment of your property for the territorial tax rolls. Seems your land value has gone up considerably with the railroad coming through." Cole took the paper, his jaw tightening as he read. "This is 3 times what I paid in taxes last year." "Progress costs money," the sheriff said with a shrug. "Payments due by month's end. Cash only." "That's 2 weeks away. You know I can't raise that kind of money so fast." "Then I guess you'll be looking to sell. Lucky for you. Baron Rockefeller's still interested. He'd probably pay enough to cover your taxes and leave you something besides." Rose stepped forward. "May I see that assessment?" Vanderbilt's eyes narrowed. "This is between men. Miss Quinn." "Last I checked, numbers don't care about gender." She took the paper from Cole's hands, scanning it quickly. "This is wrong. You've assessed buildings that don't exist. According to this, there's a grain silo and a second barn on the property." "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm calling your assessment inaccurate." Rose said calmly, "I'd be happy to walk the property with you and point out the discrepancies. I'm sure the territorial governor would be interested to know about such errors. Inflating tax assessments could be seen as fraud." Jesse James's hand drifted toward his gun. "You threatening the sheriff?" "I'm offering to help correct an honest mistake," Rose replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Unless it wasn't a mistake." Vanderbilt's face flushed red. "You've got a mouth on you. Woman, that's dangerous in these parts." "So is false assessment," Cole said, stepping between Rose and the lawmen. "We'll pay what we rightfully owe. Not a cent more." "We'll see about that." Vanderbilt swung back onto his horse. 2 weeks. Maddox, have the money or have your bags packed." After they'd gone, June exploded. 3 times the taxes. How can they do that?" "Because they wear the badges," Cole said grimly. "And Rockefeller's got deep pockets." "We could sell some horses," Rose suggested. "The yearlings might bring enough." "In this drought, nobody's buying." Cole ran a hand through his hair. "I'll ride to Lincoln. See if the bank will extend credit." "They won't," June said flatly. "Not with Rockefeller on the board of directors." That evening, Rose found Cole on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains red. She sat beside him, noting how the failing light emphasized the lines around his eyes. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the high pastures you mentioned." "Too dangerous. I won't risk it." What if we didn't take the whole herd, just the yearlings and the breeding stock? A smaller group could move faster, avoid trouble. Cole looked at her. We? You'll need every hand you can get. June can manage the ranch with Benedict's help. I'll come with you to the mountains. Rose, you don't understand. Los Mudos aren't the only danger up there. The weather can turn in minutes. There's catamounts, bears. I shot at raiders my first night here, she reminded him. I helped deliver hope this morning. I'm not some delicate flower that wilts at the first sign of trouble. I never said you were. Then stop trying to protect me from life. She stood, hands on her hips. You gave me a chance when no one else would. Let me return the favor. Before he could respond, Grace came running around the corner of the house. Miss Rose, come quick, Abraham's stuck. They found the boy at the bottom of an old well they'd been using for storage since it went dry. He'd climbed down after a toy and couldn't get back up. His wails echoed off the stone walls. Get a rope, Cole ordered Benedict. June, bring a lantern. But Rose was already lowering herself into the well, using the rough stones as handholds. Abraham, honey, I'm coming. Just stay still. The descent was harder than she'd expected. The stones were loose, crumbling under her weight. Halfway down, her foot slipped, and she heard Cole's sharp intake of breath above. I'm fine, she called up, though her heart was racing. Almost there. Abraham had wedged himself into a crevice, tears streaming down his dirty face. I wanted my soldier, he whimpered, clutching a wooden toy. Papa carved it. And we've got it, Rose said gently, working him free. Now, I need you to be very brave. Can you climb on my back? The journey up was agonizing. Abraham's added weight made every handhold precious, every movement calculated. Rose's arms burned, and sweat stung her eyes. Above, Cole's voice guided her, steady and calm. When they finally emerged, Cole pulled them both to safety in one motion. Abraham flew into June's arms while Rose collapsed on the ground, breathing hard. That, Cole said, was the most foolish, brave thing I've seen in years. Couldn't leave him down there? Rose gasped. No, he agreed, helping her sit up. You couldn't? That night at dinner, the story had already become legend. Benedict demonstrated Rose's climbing technique with wild gestures, while Abraham showed everyone his rescued soldier. Even June smiled as she served the stew. You're staying, Grace announced suddenly. It wasn't a question. Rose looked around the table at these children who'd lost so much. At Cole, who carried the weight of their world on his shoulders. At June, who was too young to be so old. Yes, she said simply. I'm staying. Later, as she helped Cole check the horses, he brought up the mountain pastures again. If you're serious about coming, we leave day after tomorrow. Can't wait longer than that. I'm serious. It'll be hard riding, long days, cold nights, and nothing like what you're used to. Rose laughed, surprising them both. Cole, I spent 2 years engaged to a man who thought I was broken because my body wouldn't do what bodies are supposed to do. I've been gossiped about, pitied, and nearly sold to pay my father's debts. A little hard riding doesn't scare me. He studied her in the lantern light. No, I don't suppose it does. A coyote howled somewhere in the darkness, answered by another. The sound raised goosebumps on Rose's arms, but she didn't shiver. This land was teaching her something she'd never learned in her father's comfortable farmhouse or Edison's respectable parlor. It was teaching her that survival wasn't about what you could or couldn't produce, but about what you could endure. Miss Rose, Benedict appeared in the barn door. There's riders coming, 3 of them. Cole's hand went to his rifle, but Rose recognized the lead rider as he entered the circle of light. It was Levi Strauss, who ran the feed store in town. With him were 2 other merchants she knew by sight. Evening, Cole, Levi said, tipping his hat to Rose. Ma'am, sorry to call so late, but we heard about your tax trouble. Bad news travels fast, Cole said warily. So does good news sometimes. Levi dismounted, pulling a leather pouch from his saddlebag. The Merchants Association took up a collection. It's not enough to pay your whole tax bill, but it might help. Cole stared at the pouch. I can't take charity. It's not charity. The second merchant, a German named Karl Benz, spoke up. It's an investment. You keep Los Mudos from raiding our supply wagons. Your ranch fails. We all suffer. Besides, Levi added with a grin, Miss Rose here has been teaching our children their letters while their mothers shop. Sarah says little Emma can write her whole name now. That's worth something. Rose felt warmth spread through her chest. She'd started the informal lessons on a whim, gathering the children on the general store's porch while their parents conducted business. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed. Take it, the third merchant urged, and give Rockefeller hell. After they left, Cole weighed the pouch in his hand. It's maybe a quarter of what we need, he said, but it's a start. The mountains will give us the rest, Rose said firmly. You sound awfully sure about that. She thought about Charlotte and her foal, about Abraham at the bottom of the well, about the children learning their letters on the store porch. I'm sure about a lot of things lately. Cole smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. All right then, we'll leave at first light. Day after tomorrow. June, you'll need to... I know what needs doing. June interrupted. Been helping run this place since I was younger than Grace. We'll be fine. I never doubted it, Cole said, but Rose caught the worry in his eyes. That night, she made a list of supplies they'd need for the mountain trip. Food that would travel well, medical supplies in case of injury, ammunition for protection. She'd learned to plan for the worst while hoping for the best. A soft knock interrupted her preparations. Abraham stood in the doorway in his nightshirt, the wooden soldier clutched in his hand. Miss Rose, can you check for monsters? It had become their routine. Every night, she'd check under his bed and in the closet, declaring the room monster-free. But tonight, he climbed into her lap after the inspection was complete. June says you're going away, he whispered. Only for a little while. I'm helping Cole take the horses to find better grass. You'll come back. Rose hugged him tighter. I'll come back. Promise. She thought about all the promises broken in her life. Her father's promise to provide for her. Edison's promise to marry her. Society's promise that being a good woman would be enough. I promise, she said, and meant it. After Abraham was tucked back in bed, Rose returned to her preparations. Tomorrow she'd help June preserve meat for their journey, mend the torn leather on Cole's saddlebags, and teach Benedict how to properly dose the medicine for Charlotte's foal if needed. But tonight, she stood at her window watching the stars wheel overhead, so bright in the clear desert air. Somewhere out there, the mountains waited with their promises of water and danger. Sheriff Vanderbilt schemed with Baron Rockefeller. Los Mudos planned their next raid. And here, in this pine-board house with its cracked walls and sagging roof, Rose Quinn was building something she'd never expected to find a life measured not by what she couldn't give, but by what she could. The old well where Abraham had been trapped stood silent in the moonlight, a reminder that even dry places had once held abundance. Perhaps that was the lesson of this hard land, that drought was temporary, but the will to survive, to hope, to dig deeper that was eternal. Rose touched the windowsill where Eleanor Maddox's initials were carved, adding her own silent promise to the woman who'd come before. I'll take care of them. All of them. Whatever comes. In the barn, Hope whinnied softly, already stronger than she'd been that morning. It was a good sound, Rose thought, the sound of life persisting despite the odds. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, with a house full of sleeping children and the promise of mountains on the horizon, Rose Quinn finally understood what home meant. It wasn't a place or a thing or even a person. It was a choice, made new each day, to stay and fight for something worth saving. Black smoke curled against the morning sky like a serpent of progress, marking the test run of the new locomotive 20 miles east. Rose watched it from the mercantile porch where she'd come to buy supplies for their return from the mountain pastures. 2 weeks had passed since they'd successfully moved the herd to better grazing, and while the animals had thrived, the town had transformed in their absence. Baron Rockefeller's land office now dominated Main Street, its fresh paint and gilded sign a stark contrast to the weathered buildings around it. Posters plastered on every wall promised fair compensation for your property and progress through partnership. Rose noted how many of her neighbors studied those signs with desperate hope. 5 families sold while you were gone, Clara Barton said, joining Rose on the porch. The midwife's face was grave. The Jeffersons, the Grants, both Lincoln families, and old Samuel Clemens couldn't pay the new taxes. Where did they go? California, mostly. Rockefeller gave them just enough to buy passage west. Clara lowered her voice. Sheriff's been asking about you and Cole. Seemed mighty interested in when you'd be back, as if summoned by his name. Vanderbilt emerged from the land office, Baron Rockefeller at his side. The railroad man had gained weight since his arrival, his silk vest straining across his middle. They were laughing about something, heads bent together like conspirators. Rose turned to enter the store, but a familiar voice stopped her cold. Rosalie, my God, is it really you? Thomas Edison stood before her, older and softer than she remembered, but still carrying himself with the casual confidence of inherited wealth. His clothes marked him as a man of means, fine wool trousers, leather boots that had never known hard work, a gold watch chain glinting in the sun. Thomas, she managed, what are you doing here? Looking for you, actually. He removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. I heard you were... That is, news reached Austin about your circumstances. I've come to make things right. Rose felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the one that came whenever someone looked at her with that particular mixture of pity and discomfort. There's nothing to make right. You ended our engagement. We both moved on. But I was wrong. He pressed. I see that now. What does it matter if we can't have children we could adopt, or simply enjoy each other's company? I have a successful practice now. I could give you a good life. Rosalie. A real home. I have a real home. Edison's eyes traveled over her work-worn dress, the calluses on her hands, the sun-darkened skin that marked her as a woman who labored outdoors. This working as a servant for some rancher, that's not a life for someone like you. Someone like me! Rose's voice carried enough edge to make Clara step back. And what kind of someone am I, Thomas? You're educated, refined. You deserve better than... He gestured vaguely at the dusty street, the tired buildings, the whole frontier existence. Than this. Thomas Edison, isn't it? Rockefeller had approached while they talked, Vanderbilt trailing behind. I heard you'd come to town, practicing law in Austin. Clara tells me. Baron Rockefeller. Edison shook his hand eagerly. An honor, sir. I've followed your railroad ventures with great interest. Have you now? Rockefeller's smile was calculating. Perhaps we should talk. I have need of legal expertise, especially regarding property transfers and rights of way. Someone who understands both Texas and territorial law would be invaluable. Rose watched Edison preen under the attention, saw the moment he decided his fortune lay with the railroad baron rather than his former fiancée. It should have hurt, but instead she felt only a distant pity. If you'll excuse me, she said, I have purchases to make. Inside the store, she found Cole negotiating with Levi Strauss over grain prices. He looked up as she entered, immediately reading the tension in her shoulders. Trouble. Nothing I can't handle. She began gathering supplies with practiced efficiency. Clara says 5 families sold out. 6, counting the Carters. Heard they left this morning. Cole's jaw tightened. Vanderbilt's been busy. Miss Rose. June burst through the door. Benedict and the younger children behind her. There's a meeting at the church. Rockefeller's making some kind of announcement. The church was packed when they arrived. Every bench filled and people standing along the walls. Rockefeller stood at the pulpit like a preacher, with Sheriff Vanderbilt and several armed deputies flanking him. Rose spotted Edison in the front row, already playing the part of the railroad's legal counsel. "Friends," Rockefeller began, his voice carrying easily through the space. "I come before you today with wonderful news. The territorial government has approved an accelerated timeline for the railroad extension. Construction begins next month." A murmur ran through the crowd, excitement from some, dread from others. "Now, I know change is difficult," he continued, "but I want to assure you that everyone will be treated fairly. To that end, I'm prepared to make a generous offer." He nodded to Edison, who stood and unrolled a large document. "By order of the Territorial Court," Edison read, "all properties within the designated railroad corridor must be assessed at current market value. Those who sell voluntarily will receive a 20% bonus above assessment. Those who refuse," he paused for effect, "will be subject to eminent domain proceedings." "You can't do that," someone shouted from the back. "The law is quite clear." Edison replied smoothly, "Public good supersedes private ownership. The railroad serves the greater interest." Rose stood. "And who determines this current market value? The same people who tripled our tax assessments." Edison's face flushed when he recognized her. "The assessments were conducted by qualified officials, qualified to line their pockets." Rose interrupted. "I've seen the paperwork. Buildings that don't exist, improvements never made. It's fraud. Plain and simple." "That's a serious accusation," Vanderbilt said, hand dropping to his gun. "Yes, it is," a new voice said from the doorway. Florence Nightingale, the elderly schoolteacher, made her way forward with surprising dignity. "Which is why I've been corresponding with the territorial governor about these irregularities." She produced a bundle of letters from her bag. "Official assessments, compared with actual property surveys I conducted myself. The discrepancies are significant." Rockefeller's smile never wavered, but Rose saw the flash of irritation in his eyes. "My dear woman, I'm sure these are simple clerical errors." "Clerical errors that always favor the railroad." Florence's voice could have stripped paint. "How convenient." "Enough," Vanderbilt stepped forward. "Baron Rockefeller is trying to help you people. Bring progress to this backwater. Anyone who stands against that stands against the law. Your law," Cole said quietly. "Not the real law. I am the real law here, Maddox, and I'm getting mighty tired of your resistance." The tension in the church was thick enough to cut. Rose saw hands drift toward weapons, saw the fear and anger warring on her neighbors' faces. In the front row, Edison watched with the detached interest of someone observing a poker game where he held all the cards. "Perhaps," Rockefeller said, raising his hands for calm, "we should discuss this more privately. Mr. Maddox, Miss Quinn, would you join me in the vestry along with Miss Nightingale?" "Of course." The vestry was small and close, smelling of old wood and lamp oil. Rockefeller settled himself in the minister's chair while Vanderbilt leaned against the door, blocking any exit. "Oh, let's speak plainly," Rockefeller began. "I need your land. Maddox, not just for the railroad, for the water rights. That spring on your property could supply the rail workers during construction." "It supplies my cattle and my family," Cole replied. "Your family?" Rockefeller's eyes shifted to Rose. "Yes, about that. I understand Miss Quinn has been living at your ranch, unmarried, unchaperoned save for children. That's quite unusual." Rose felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I work for Mr. Maddox. There's nothing improper." "Of course not," Rockefeller said smoothly. "But people talk, and talk can be so damaging to a woman's reputation. Although given Miss Quinn's circumstances, perhaps that ship has sailed. Choose your next words carefully, Cole warned, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm merely observing that Miss Quinn's presence complicates things. However, I have a solution. He leaned back, fingers steepled. Sell me the ranch, and I'll ensure Miss Quinn is established properly elsewhere, perhaps a teaching position in California or... He glanced meaningfully at the door. Mr. Edison seemed quite eager to renew your acquaintance. My dear, I'm sure accommodations could be made. You're trying to buy me off, Rose said flatly. I'm trying to help everyone reach a beneficial arrangement. Your condition limits your options. Miss Quinn, I'm offering you a future. Florence snorted. The generosity overwhelms me. Ah, yes, the school teacher. Rockefeller's tone hardened. Those letters to the governor, very industrious of you. Of course. Mail can be so unreliable out here. Things get lost, misdirected. He examined his nails. Just as teaching positions can suddenly become unavailable. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. He stood, brushing imaginary dust from his vest. You have 1 week to accept my offer. Maddox, after that, I'll take what I need through legal channels, and anyone who stands with you will face the consequences. They filed out of the vestry to find the church nearly empty. Only a few stragglers remained, whispering among themselves. Edison waited by the door, his expression unreadable. Rosalie, he said as she passed, please reconsider. I can protect you from all this. I don't need your protection. Thomas, I never did. You need someone's. He insisted. You can't fight men like Rockefeller. No one can. Watch me, she said, and walked past him into the blazing afternoon sun. Back at the ranch that evening, the mood was grim. The children sensed the tension, eating their supper in unusual silence. Even Abraham didn't ask for a story before bed. We could still run, June said after the younger ones were asleep. Take what we can carry, head for Oregon territory, and leave everyone else to Rockefeller's mercy. Cole shook his head. This is our home, our stand. Florence was brave today, Rose observed. But she's put herself in danger. We all have, Cole replied. Question is, what do we do about it? A knock at the door interrupted them. Cole grabbed his rifle, but Rose recognized the voice calling softly from outside. It's Clara Barton. Please, I need to speak with you. The midwife entered quickly, glancing over her shoulder. There's been an accident. Florence Nightingale fell down her stairs this evening. She's asking for you, Rose. They found Florence in her small cottage, her legs splinted and her face pale but determined. Accident, my foot, she said as soon as she saw them. Someone pushed me. Didn't see who they wore a mask, but I heard them clear enough. Mind your own business, old woman. Your letters, Rose said urgently. Where are they? Hidden, and I made copies. Florence managed a tight smile. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. The originals are with Alexander Bell at the telegraph office. He's instructions to send them if anything happens to me. Clever, Cole admitted. But they'll figure that out soon enough. Then we'd better move fast. Florence struggled to sit up. There's something else. When I was researching property records, I found an interesting document. Seems Baron Rockefeller doesn't actually have the legal authority he claims. His railroad charter specifically excludes forced purchase of water rights. Rose felt a spark of hope. You mean... I mean, he's bluffing. Oh, he can make our lives miserable? But he can't legally take your spring. Cole, not without your consent. Why didn't you say this in church? Because I wanted to see how far he'd go, how desperate he is. Florence's eyes gleamed. And he's very desperate indeed. That test locomotive, it's the only one they have. The investors are getting nervous about the lack of progress. If Rockefeller doesn't secure water rights soon, the whole project could collapse. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see torches moving through the street. Vanderbilt's voice carried on the night air, calling for a safety patrol to protect decent folks from troublemakers. "They're not wasting time," Clara muttered. "Neither should we," Rose decided. "Florence, can you travel?" "Not far, not fast." "Then we bring the fight here." Rose turned to Cole. "Remember what you said about taking care of our own. It's time to show Rockefeller what that means." Over the next hours, word spread quietly through the town. By midnight, Florence's cottage was surrounded by neighbors standing guard. The merchants who'd contributed to Cole's tax fund were there, along with families who hadn't yet sold out, and even some who'd been wavering. When Vanderbilt's patrol arrived, they found not a helpless old woman but a community united. "Disperse," the sheriff ordered. "This is an illegal assembly." "We're just visiting a sick neighbor," Levi Strauss said mildly. "Nothing illegal about Christian charity." "Don't test me, shopkeeper." "Or what?" Mary Todd stepped forward, all 5 feet of her bristling with indignation. "You'll push us downstairs, too." The accusation hung in the air like gunpowder waiting for a spark. Vanderbilt's hand went to his weapon, but he was outnumbered 20-1. "This isn't over," he snarled, but he signaled his men to withdraw. As dawn broke, Rose stood on Florence's porch watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. Edison appeared, looking haggard and uncertain. "I tried to warn you," he said. "Rockefeller doesn't give up." "Neither do we." He studied her, this woman he'd once thought he knew. "You've changed, Rosalie." "No," she corrected. "I've just stopped apologizing for who I am." Edison turned to leave, then paused. "The water rights clause, Florence was right about it. I saw the charter myself. But Rockefeller has connections in Washington. He could get it changed." "Could he do it in a week?" "No, it would take months, maybe longer." Rose smiled. "Then we have time." "Time for what?" "To change his mind." As Edison walked away, Rose saw Cole approaching with June and the children. They'd brought breakfast for the guards, and Abraham ran to her with his usual enthusiasm. "Miss Rose, we cooked for everyone. I stirred the pot." She lifted him up, feeling the solid weight of this child who called her Mama Rose now without prompting. Looking over his head, she met Cole's eyes and saw her own determination reflected there. Rockefeller thought he held all the cards: money, law, force. But he'd forgotten the most important lesson of the frontier: a community that stands together is stronger than any railroad. "What now?" June asked. "Now," Rose said, setting Abraham down and squaring her shoulders, "we show Baron Rockefeller what happens when he threatens our family." The black smoke of the test locomotive still marked the horizon, but it no longer seemed like a portent of doom. It was just smoke, and smoke, Rose had learned, eventually clears. What remained was the land, the people, and the ties that bound them together stronger than any legal document, more precious than any railroad fortune. And Rose Quinn, the woman who couldn't bear children, stood at the center of it all, mother to a family she'd chosen and protector of a home she'd earned. The moon hung low over the canyon, casting everything in silver and shadow as Rose guided her mare through the narrow passage. Grace clung to her waist, burning with fever despite the cool night air. They'd been visiting the Whitman homestead, helping the family rebuild after the fire when the child had complained of headache and dizziness. By sunset, she was barely conscious. "Just a little farther," Rose murmured, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring Grace or herself. The shortcut through Devil's Canyon would save them 2 hours, but the rocky terrain was treacherous even in daylight. A distinctive rattle froze her blood. The horse shied, nearly throwing them both. In the moonlight, Rose saw the snake coiled on a flat rock directly in their path, a timber rattler, thick as her wrist and agitated by their presence. "Easy, girl." She soothed the mare, trying to back away slowly, but the canyon walls were too narrow here. They couldn't turn around, couldn't go forward. The snake's rattle intensified, its head rising in warning. Grace stirred weakly. "Miss Rose." "Shh, sweetheart, stay still." The mare danced nervously, iron shoes striking sparks from the rocks. One wrong step would bring them within striking distance. Rose's mind raced through options. None of them good. She couldn't shoot. The sound would panic the horse in this confined space. Couldn't dismount without putting herself directly in the snake's path. Then the mare stumbled. It happened fast, a loose rock, a loss of balance. As the horse lurched sideways, Rose felt herself falling. Instinctively turning to shield Grace, she hit the ground hard, pain shooting through her right calf as something struck like a hammer blow. The snake recoiled, preparing for another strike. Rose grabbed the nearest rock and hurled it, sending the rattlers slithering into the shadows. But the damage was done. Even in the moonlight, she could see the 2 puncture wounds above her boot, already beginning to swell. "No," she breathed. "Not here. Not with Grace burning up and help miles away." The mare had steadied, standing with heaving sides. Rose knew she had minutes, maybe less, before the venom made movement impossible. Using strength born of desperation, she lifted Grace back onto the saddle. "Listen to me," she told the half-conscious child. "You need to hold on. Can you do that?" Grace nodded weakly, fingers tangling in the mare's mane. Rose hauled herself up behind her, already feeling the fire spreading through her leg. The canyon blurred around her as she urged the mare forward. Each heartbeat pumped poison through her veins. Her right foot went numb, then her ankle. By the time they cleared the canyon, she could barely stay upright. The ranch lights flickered in the distance like stars fallen to earth. So close, so impossibly far. "Cole," she called, but her voice came out as a whisper. The reins slipped from nerveless fingers. "Get us home, girl, please." The mare, sensing disaster, broke into a gallop. Rose wrapped her arms around Grace, holding on with failing strength. The world tilted, spun. She tasted copper and sage. Then Cole's voice, sharp with fear. "Rose, dear God, June! Get the medical kit, Benedict! Take Grace!" Strong arms pulled her from the saddle. She was flying. Then she was still, laid out on the kitchen table, while hands worked frantically around her. "Rattler," she managed. "Right leg. Grace needs—" "June's tending Grace. Be still." Cole's knife sliced through her boot, revealing flesh already swollen and discolored. "This is going to hurt." "Do it." The knife bit deep, crossing the puncture marks. Rose arched against the pain, biting down on the leather belt someone pressed between her teeth. Cole's mouth was on the wound, drawing out blood and venom. Spitting, repeating. Each pull felt like fire racing through her veins. "More," she gasped when he paused. "Deeper. I could hurt you worse." "Ride me hard," she said, half delirious. "I need your bite." Cole's eyes met hers, understanding passing between them. This wasn't about snakebite anymore. This was about trust, about surrendering control, about letting someone else fight for her life when she'd spent so long fighting alone. He bent back to the wound, working with renewed determination. June appeared with cold compresses, packing them around Rose's leg. Benedict brought whiskey for cleaning, blankets for warmth. Even little Abraham helped, holding the lantern steady with solemn concentration. Time blurred. Rose drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of voices, movement, Cole's constant presence. At some point she heard him whisper, fierce and certain, "I'll be the cowboy who brings you home. You hear me? Rose, I'm bringing you home." She wanted to answer, to tell him she trusted him, believed him, but the darkness was so heavy, and she was so tired. The last thing she remembered was the sound of her own heartbeat, stubborn and steady, refusing to quit. Dawn was painting the mountains purple when Rose finally opened her eyes. She lay in her own bed, leg elevated and wrapped in clean bandages. Every muscle ached, but she was alive. Wonderfully, miraculously alive. Cole sat slumped in a chair beside her, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and dried blood stained his shirt. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night. "Grace?" she asked, voice rusty. His head snapped up. "Fine. The fever broke around midnight. She's sleeping." His hand found hers, gripping tight. "You almost died." "But I didn't." "But you almost—" He broke off, jaw working. "When I saw you on that horse, barely conscious, I thought, I can't lose you. Rose, I can't." "You won't." She squeezed his fingers weakly. "Too stubborn to die." Thank God for that. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Though if you ever scare me like that again, I'll kill you myself." She laughed, then winced as the movement jarred her leg. "How bad?" "Bad enough. But clean, I got most of the venom out. Clara checked you over. Said you'll heal fine if you stay off it for a week." "A week, Cole. We can't afford—" "We can't afford to lose you." His voice was rough. "The ranch, the children, none of it means anything without you here." The door creaked open, and June peered in. "She's awake, thank God." She entered carrying a tray of broth and bread. "You scared us something awful." "Sorry." "Don't apologize. Just get better." June set the tray on the nightstand, then surprised Rose by bending to kiss her forehead. "The little ones have been asking for you all night. I told them you're too mean for any snake to kill." "June!" Cole scolded, but Rose laughed again. She's not wrong. Over the next days, Rose learned what it meant to be cared for. She'd spent so long being the caretaker first for her ailing father, then trying to be the perfect future wife, now tending the ranch and children. Being still, letting others tend her, went against every instinct. Cole was a constant presence, changing her bandages with gentle hands, reading to her from the collection of books June had borrowed from Florence. The children brought her flowers, drawings, and Benedict's attempts at cooking, which Cole wisely intercepted before they reached her. "You saved my life," Grace said on the third day, curled carefully against Rose's good side. "Papa always said heroes do that save people even when it's dangerous." "I'm no hero, just someone who loves you very much." Grace considered this. Maybe that's what heroes are, people who love enough to be brave. On the fourth night, when the house was quiet and the pain had dulled to a manageable ache, Cole finally spoke about what had been hovering between them since that desperate night. "What you said, when I was treating the bite, about riding hard and needing—" He cleared his throat. "You were delirious." "I was dying," Rose corrected. "And when you're dying, you say what matters. I needed you to fight for me, harder than what was safe or proper, and you did." He was quiet for a long moment. "I've been fighting for you since the day you walked into that relay station, fighting my own rules, my own fears. Martha, my first wife, she died in childbirth. The baby, too. I swore I'd never risk that kind of loss again." "Cole!" "Let me finish." He moved from the chair to sit on the edge of her bed. "Then you arrived, and suddenly all my careful walls meant nothing. You were grieving your own losses, building your own walls, and somehow that made it worse, because I could see myself in you, see what we could be if we were brave enough." "Are we brave enough?" He cupped her face in his calloused hands. "You rode through a canyon at night with a sick child and a rattlesnake bite, trusting a horse to bring you home. I'd say you've got courage to spare." "That wasn't courage, that was faith." She covered his hands with hers. "Faith that home was where you were, that you'd fight for me the way I'd fight for you." He kissed her then, soft and careful, mindful of her weakened state. But Rose had had enough of careful. She pulled him closer, pouring all her faith and frustration and need into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "When you're healed," he said roughly. "When you're strong again, we'll do this right." "Define right." "Marriage, family, future." He smiled at her shocked expression. "What? You think I'd compromise your reputation and not make an honest woman of you? My reputation was compromised long before I met you. Then I'll give you a new one. Mrs. Cole Maddox has a nice ring to it." Rose felt tears prick her eyes. "The barren woman. Remember, I can't give you children." "You've already given me children. June, Benedict, Grace, Abraham, they're ours. Rose, maybe not by blood, but by choice. And that's what family really is. The people you choose to fight for." "When did you become so wise?" "Sometime between drawing snake venom from your leg and watching you sleep for 3 days straight." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Say yes. To marriage or to fighting?" "Both. All of it. Everything." Rose thought about her mother's Bible, gathering dust on the dresser, about the dreams she'd buried with her broken engagement, about the woman she'd become in this hard, beautiful place. "Yes," she said simply. Cole's smile could have lit the whole valley. He kissed her again, then stood reluctantly. "Rest now. Clara says you can try walking tomorrow if the swelling's down." But rest was impossible after that. Rose's mind raced with plans, possibilities. A wedding simple. At the ranch, the children would help with preparations. Florence could officiate if the circuit preacher wasn't available. They'd invite the whole town, show Rockefeller and his cronies that this community couldn't be broken. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Abraham padded in, trailing his blanket. "Mama Rose, I had a bad dream about snakes." "Come here, sweet boy." He climbed carefully onto the bed, nestling against her good side. "June says you're gonna marry Cole. Does that mean you'll be our real mama?" "I'm already your real mama. A piece of paper won't change that." "But you'll stay forever." Rose pressed a kiss to his tousled hair, breathing in the little boy's scent of dirt and sunshine. "Forever and a day." "Promise." "I promise." Abraham relaxed, his breathing evening out. But soon Grace appeared. Then Benedict, and finally June, all drawn by some invisible signal that the family was gathering. They arranged themselves carefully around Rose, a tangle of limbs and love. Cole found them like that an hour later. He stood in the doorway, something soft and wondering in his expression. "Room for one more?" he asked. "Always," Rose said, and meant it. He settled himself at the foot of the bed, one hand resting on her bandaged leg, and there in the lamplight, surrounded by their chosen family, Rose felt the last of her old wounds begin to heal, not the snake bite that would leave a scar, a permanent reminder of how close she'd come to losing everything, but the deeper wound, the one that said she was less than whole, less than worthy. "Tell us a story," Grace requested sleepily. "About what?" "About us, about how we became a family." Rose looked at Cole, saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a woman who thought she had nothing to offer, and a man who thought he had too much to lose, and a house full of children who needed both of them." She wove their truth into the story, transforming pain into purpose, loss into love. The children drifted off one by one, but Cole stayed awake, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her ankle. "That's a good story," he said when she finished. "The best part is it's true." "No," he corrected. "The best part is it's just beginning." Outside, a coyote howled, answered by another, but inside the house, all was warmth and safety. Rose had ridden through darkness and poison to reach this moment, and every second of pain had been worth it. She'd come to New Mexico territory expecting nothing but survival. Instead, she'd found a love that didn't demand perfection, children who called her mother, and a man who'd literally drawn poison from her veins to keep her alive. "I love you," she said quietly, the words new and precious on her tongue. Cole's hand tightened on her ankle. "I love you too. Have since you stood up to Hearst that first day, refusing to be sold like property. That wasn't courage, that was desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing." The lamp burned low, casting dancing shadows on the wall. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Rockefeller's deadline was approaching, and the fight for their land was far from over. But tonight, in this bed full of sleeping children and quiet promises, Rose Quinn knew she'd already won everything that mattered. The snakebite throbbed, a steady reminder of mortality. But stronger than the pain was the pulse of life flowing through her, not the life she'd failed to create, but the one she'd chosen to nurture. And that, she realized, was the greatest creation of all. "Sleep," Cole murmured. "I'll keep watch." "Together," she corrected. "We'll keep watch together." And they did, through the long night and all the nights that followed. Two souls scarred but not broken, building something beautiful from the ashes of their former dreams. The snake had struck, the venom had burned, but love stubborn, persistent, chosen daily had proven stronger than any poison. In the morning, when the first rays of sun touched the mountains, Rose would take her first tentative steps on her healing leg. But tonight, she was exactly where she needed to be, home, held, and whole in all the ways that truly mattered. Sheriff Vanderbilt's mobile court was nothing more than a wagon with pretensions, but he'd draped it with territorial flags and propped up a makeshift bench to give it an air of authority. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard as he read from an official-looking document, his voice carrying the weight of corrupted law. "By order of the territorial court, this hearing will determine the rightful ownership of the grazing lands currently claimed by Cole Maddox." Vanderbilt's small eyes glittered with satisfaction. "Evidence has come to light suggesting Mr. Maddox obtained these lands through fraudulent means." Rose stood beside Cole, her legs still tender from the snakebite, but her spine steel straight. The entire town had turned out for this farce of justice, some to support, others to witness what everyone knew was a predetermined outcome. Baron Rockefeller sat in the front row, fanning himself with his hat and looking pleased as a cat with cream. "What evidence?" Cole asked, his voice steady despite the tension in his jaw. Vanderbilt produced a yellowed paper with theatrical flourish. "Military records indicate that one Cole Maddox was responsible for the destruction of a supply depot in 1882, resulting in the deaths of 3 soldiers. A man who would betray his country wouldn't hesitate to forge land claims." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Rose felt Cole stiffen beside her, old guilt rising like floodwater. She grabbed his hand, squeezing hard. "That's a lie," she said clearly. "Women aren't recognized to speak in territorial proceedings." Vanderbilt smirked. "Unless they're witnesses. Are you a witness to events that occurred before you even arrived here?" "I'm a witness to the truth," Rose shot back, "which seems to be in short supply at this hearing." Thomas Edison stood up from his place beside Rockefeller. "Your Honor, if I may, Miss Quinn's outbursts are disrupting these proceedings. Perhaps she should be removed." "Sit down. Thomas," a strong voice called from the back. Florence Nightingale made her way forward, still limping from her accident but radiating authority. "I have documents the court needs to see." "This is highly irregular," Vanderbilt began. "So is holding court in a ranch yard with a jury bought and paid for." Florence produced a leather portfolio. "But if we're going to play this game, let's play it properly." She withdrew a stack of papers, handling them like weapons. Sworn affidavits from 3 soldiers who served with Cole Maddox. They describe how he destroyed that depot to create a firebreak, saving an entire wagon train of settlers from a wildfire. The military charged him initially. Yes, but charges were dropped when the truth came out. "Those could be forged," Edison argued. "Then it's fortunate I also have this." Florence held up another document. A commendation from General Ulysses Grant himself, thanking Maddox for his quick thinking and sacrifice. Hardly the record of a traitor. Rockefeller stood abruptly. These theatrics are pointless. The man still owes taxes he can't pay. The land will be forfeit regardless. About those taxes, another voice chimed in. Clara Barton emerged from the crowd, along with Levi Strauss and several other merchants. We've been doing some calculating. Seems the assessments on all our properties contain the same errors. Clerical mistakes, Vanderbilt said quickly. Funny how these mistakes always multiply the amount owed by exactly 3. Clara held up her own ledger. Almost like someone was using a formula instead of actually assessing property. The crowd murmured, anger beginning to overtake fear. Rose saw the moment Vanderbilt realized he was losing control. Enough. He slammed his gavel on the wagon bed. Cole Maddox stands accused of destroying government property. That's a federal crime. I'm placing him under arrest pending transport to... No. The word came from Rose, but it might as well have been a gunshot for the silence it created. She stepped forward, placing herself between Cole and the sheriff. You want to arrest someone for that depot fire? Arrest me. Rose, what are you doing? Cole grabbed her arm. She shook him off, addressing the crowd. I've been corresponding with authorities back east. The real ones, not Baron Rockefeller's puppets. They're very interested in reports of tax fraud and intimidation in the territories. You're bluffing, Edison said, but uncertainty colored his voice. Rose smiled. I checked the telegraph office. Samuel Morse has been very helpful in sending my messages. The territorial governor knows exactly what's happening here. Federal marshals are already on their way. It was partly true. She had sent messages, though whether anyone would respond was another matter, but poker had been her father's game, and he'd taught her well. Sometimes the threat was worth more than the cards in your hand. Vanderbilt's face flushed purple. You little... Sheriff, a new voice interrupted. Young but firm. Benjamin Franklin stepped out of the crowd, the fresh-faced surveyor adjusting his spectacles nervously. I think you should see this. He unrolled a map on the wagon bed. I've been surveying for the railroad, as you know, but I've also been documenting something else. Every piece of land you've seized, every family you've driven out, every clerical error in the tax rolls. You work for me, Rockefeller snarled. I work for the truth, Franklin corrected. And the truth is, you've been systematically stealing land to sell to Eastern investors. The railroad's just an excuse. The crowd pressed closer, anger building like a thunderhead. Rose saw hands drifting toward weapons and knew they were balanced on a knife's edge. This changes nothing, Vanderbilt declared, but his voice had lost its authority. Maddox owes taxes. If he can't pay, he can... Every head turned as a lone rider approached. The man was weathered as old leather, with eyes that had seen too much and shoulders that carried it anyway. He dismounted with the careful movements of someone who'd spent decades in the saddle. Name's William Hickok, he said simply. Though folks call me Wild Bill, I hear you're having some legal troubles. Cole stepped forward, confusion clear on his face. Mr. Hickok, I don't understand. Why are you here? The older man smiled. Got a message from an old friend asking me to look into some irregularities out here. Turns out my friend was right to be concerned. He pulled out a badge. I'm also a deputy cuisson, marshal with authority to investigate federal crimes in the territories. Vanderbilt's face went from purple to white. You have no jurisdiction. Tax fraud is federal, so's intimidation of witnesses, and from what I'm hearing, you've been mighty busy with both. Hickok's hand rested casually on his gun. Now, we can do this easy or hard. Your choice. Rose held her breath as Vanderbilt's hand twitched toward his weapon. The crowd scattered, mothers pulling children behind wagons. But before anyone could draw, a commotion erupted from the road. Riders were coming hard, dust billowing behind them, Los Mudos the silent ones thundering straight for the ranch. But something was wrong with the picture. They weren't attacking. They were fleeing. Behind them came more riders, these wearing badges and riding with the coordinated precision of a military unit, federal marshals, just as Rose had hoped but hadn't truly believed would come. "Well," Hickok drawled, "looks like the cavalry's here after all." In the chaos that followed, Vanderbilt tried to run. He made it 3 steps before June tripped him with a well-placed bucket. He went down hard, his gun skittering across the dirt to land at Abraham's feet. "Don't touch that," Rose warned the boy, scooping him up and away from the weapon. The federal marshals rounded up Los Mudos with surprising efficiency. Their leader, when unmasked, proved to be none other than Jesse James, Vanderbilt's own deputy. "You were using them to terrorize people into selling," Cole said, understanding dawning. "Can't prove nothing," James spat. "Don't need to," Hickok said mildly. "The boys you were chasing had plenty to say. Seems they got tired of being your scapegoats, especially after you stopped paying them." Rockefeller tried to maintain his composure as the marshals closed in. "This is all a misunderstanding. I'm a legitimate businessman," who coincidentally profited every time these raiders struck. Florence held up another ledger. "I've tracked every attack, every family that sold immediately after. The pattern is quite clear." "Circumstantial evidence? Maybe, but this isn't—" Franklin produced a telegram. "From your investors back east. Seems they're not happy about their money being used for land theft instead of railroad construction. They're withdrawing funding, effective immediately." Rockefeller's composure finally cracked. "You can't do this. I own this town. I own all of you." "Nobody owns us," Rose said quietly. "That's what you never understood. This isn't about money or land or progress. It's about home, family, the things you can't buy or steal." As the marshals led Rockefeller and Vanderbilt away, Edison stood uncertainly in the yard. His fine clothes were dusty, his carefully styled hair wilted in the heat. "Rosalie," he began. "Go home, Thomas," she said, not unkindly. "There's nothing for you here." He looked around at the crowd, farmers and merchants, Mexicans and Anglos, all united in their relief and determination. "I don't understand any of this. You could have had a respectable life. Comfort, security. I have all those things, just not your version of them." Edison left without another word, a man who'd backed the wrong horse and lost everything but his pride. Rose watched him go without regret. He was part of a past that no longer had any hold on her. "Miss Rose," Grace tugged at her skirt. "Does this mean we get to keep the ranch?" "It means we get to keep fighting for it," Cole said, kneeling beside his daughter. "But with better odds now." Hickok approached, tipping his hat to Rose. "Ma'am, your telegrams made quite an impression on the governor. He's mighty interested in cleaning up corruption in the territories." "How did you get here so fast? My messages only went out a week ago." The marshal smiled. "Let's just say Florence Nightingale has friends in high places. She's been writing letters longer than you've been sending telegrams." Rose looked at the elderly teacher with new respect. Florence winked. "Never underestimate a schoolmarm with a grudge," she said. As the crowd began to disperse, neighbors stopping to shake Cole's hand and congratulate him, Rose found herself standing in the same spot where she'd first arrived months ago. The ranch looked different now, not the buildings, which were still weathered and patched, but the life within them. Children's laughter rang from the porch where June was describing Vanderbilt's tumble with dramatic flair. The garden she'd helped plant was fighting through the drought, green shoots stubborn against the brown earth, and everywhere, the signs of a community that had chosen to stand together rather than be picked off one by one. "You did this," Cole said, coming to stand beside her. "Your telegrams, your courage. You saved us all." "We saved each other. That's what families do." He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close despite the watching crowd. Speaking of family, I believe we have a wedding to plan. After all this, you still want to marry me. Especially after all this. He turned her to face him. Rose Quinn, you faced down sheriffs and snake bites, railroad barons and righteous fools. You fought for strangers who became family in a home that wasn't even yours yet. If that doesn't make you the woman I want to spend my life with, I don't know what would. It is mine, she corrected. Has been since the night I climbed down a well for Abraham. Maybe even since that first morning, making coffee before dawn. She smiled up at him. But yes, Cole Maddox, I'll marry you, though Lord knows you're getting the worse end of this bargain. I'll take my chances. He kissed her there in the dusty yard, in full view of half the town. It should have been scandalous. Instead, it felt like a benediction, a blessing on new beginnings. Mama Rose Papa Cole. Abraham came running, his face bright with excitement. Mr. Hickok says he'll teach me to quick draw. Can I please? Absolutely not, they said in unison, then laughed at their shared parental horror. Maybe when you're older. Cole amended. Much older. How about I teach you to whistle like a meadowlark instead? Hickok offered, winking at the relieved parents. As the day wore on, the yard transformed into an impromptu celebration. Tables appeared laden with food neighbors had somehow scraped together despite the hard times. Someone brought out a fiddle, and soon couples were dancing in the dust, celebrating not just Cole's victory but their own survival. Rose found herself pulled into dance after dance, her healing leg protesting but her heart too light to care. She danced with Levi Strauss, who whispered thanks for teaching his daughter to read. With Carl Benz, who promised a wedding cake that would be remembered for years. Even with Wild Bill Hickok, who moved with surprising grace for such a weathered man. But it was the dance with Cole as the sun set that she'd remember forever. They swayed together while June played a slow tune on the fiddle. The children sprawled sleepily around them, the worst of their troubles behind them at last. I used to think I was cursed, Rose murmured against his shoulder. That my body's failure meant I had nothing to offer. And now? She gestured at the scene around them, the community they'd helped save, the children they'd chosen to raise, the love they'd built from ashes and determination. Now I know that families come in all forms, that motherhood isn't just about birth, that sometimes the best things grow from the rockiest soil. Like desert roses, Cole agreed. Blooming where nothing else can survive. Is that what I am, a desert rose? Strong, beautiful, and impossible to kill, he confirmed. Though I'd prefer if you stopped testing that last part. She laughed, the sound carrying across the yard to where Florence sat with Clara. The two women plotting something that would no doubt improve the town whether it wanted improving or not. No more snake bites, Rose promised. No more midnight rides through dangerous canyons. And no more corrupt sheriffs or railroad barons. Well, let's not make promises we can't keep. The stars came out one by one, diamonds scattered across velvet. The party wound down slowly, families drifting home with full bellies and lighter hearts. But the Maddox family, for that's what they were now, truly and completely lingered in their yard. Benedict had fallen asleep against June's shoulder. Grace curled in Cole's lap, fighting sleep with stubborn determination. Abraham, despite his best efforts, had succumbed to dreams in Rose's arms. We should get them to bed, Cole said softly. In a moment, Rose wanted to hold on to this, the weight of Abraham's trust. The sound of June humming under her breath, the solid presence of Cole beside her. Just another moment. Because she knew that while they'd won this battle, the war for survival in the territories never truly ended. There would be other challenges, droughts and storms, sickness and loss. The railroad would still come eventually, bringing change whether they wanted it or not. But tonight, under the vast New Mexico sky, with her chosen family safe around her, Rose Quinn, soon to be Maddox, felt rich beyond measure. She'd come west with nothing but shame and a carpetbag. She'd found a love that saw her as whole, children who called her mother, and a community worth fighting for. The snake's bite had scarred her leg. The fight for justice had scarred her heart. But like the desert roses Cole compared her to, she'd learned that scars were just proof of survival. And Rose Quinn, teacher, mother, fighter, lover, was nothing if not a survivor. "Let's go home," she said at last. "We are home," Cole corrected. And she knew he was right. Home wasn't a place. It was the people you'd bleed for, fight for, live for. It was choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. It was building something worth protecting in a land that tested you daily. It was love, stubborn as cactus flowers and twice as likely to draw blood if you weren't careful. But Rose had never been careful. And as she helped carry their sleeping children into the house, she thanked whatever power had brought her to this place, these people, this unexpected life. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she was exactly where she belonged. The wooden church stood like a sentinel against the morning sky, its simple bell tower casting a long shadow across the dusty main street. Inside, every pew was packed, with more folks standing along the walls and spilling out onto the porch. The whole town had turned out for what promised to be the most dramatic trial in Silver Arroyo's short history. Rose sat in the front row between Cole and Florence Nightingale, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the tension crackling through the air. Behind them, the children fidgeted under June's watchful eye, dressed in their Sunday best and trying to understand why their peaceful life had once again been upended. At the makeshift judge's bench, really just the pulpit draped with a territorial flag, Judge Theodore Roosevelt had arrived from Santa Fe to oversee the proceedings. A young man with wire spectacles and an energetic manner. He'd already made it clear he had little patience for corruption. "This court will come to order," Roosevelt announced, banging his gavel with enthusiasm. "We're here to examine evidence of systematic fraud, intimidation, and theft perpetrated by Baron Rockefeller, former Sheriff Vanderbilt, and their associates." Rockefeller sat at the defendant's table, still trying to project an air of wounded dignity despite his shackles. Thomas Edison had reluctantly agreed to continue as his counsel, though he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Vanderbilt slouched beside them, his badge gone and his belligerence dimmed but not extinguished. "Your Honor," Edison began, rising smoothly. "My clients maintain their innocence. These are successful businessmen who've been victimized by a conspiracy of jealous locals." "Oh, sit down, Thomas," Florence interrupted, getting to her feet with the help of her cane. "Save your speeches for someone who didn't watch these men terrorize our community for months." "Mrs. Nightingale," Judge Roosevelt said mildly, "you'll have your chance to speak." "Then let's get to it." She moved forward, producing the thick folder of evidence she'd compiled. "I have here documented proof of 47 separate instances of tax fraud, 23 cases of forged documents, and written testimony from Los Mudos gang members confirming they were paid by Vanderbilt to attack specific homesteads." "Objection," Edison called. "That testimony was coerced by offering them food and medical care," Marshal Hickok drawled from his seat. "Funny definition of coercion you have there, counselor." Rose watched as Florence methodically laid out the evidence, her teacher's precision turning the seemingly random acts of violence and legal manipulation into a clear pattern. Maps showed which properties had been targeted. Ledgers revealed the flow of money from Eastern investors through Rockefeller to Vanderbilt's deputies. Even the timing of the attacks corresponded with railroad survey reports. "It's brilliant in its simplicity," Florence concluded. "Create fear through violence, impose illegal taxes, force sales at a fraction of true value, then resell to investors at enormous profit, all while hiding behind the badge and the promise of progress." The crowd murmured angrily. Many of them had lost friends, neighbors, even family members to this scheme. "If it please the court," Cole said, standing slowly. "I'd like to speak to the human cost of these crimes." Roosevelt nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Maddox." Cole moved to the center of the room, his presence commanding despite his simple clothes. "Your Honor, we've heard about money and land and legal tricks, but what about Mary Watts, who lost her husband to Los Mudos and had to sell her farm for coach fare back east? What about the Vasquez family, burned out of their home because they couldn't pay triple taxes on land they'd worked for 3 generations? He turned to face the packed church. "Every person here has a story. Every family has suffered, not from drought or disease or the normal hardships of frontier life, those we can bear, but from greed dressed up as law, violence masquerading as progress." "Very touching," Rockefeller said coldly. "But business is business, if people can't adapt to changing times." Changing times. Rose found herself on her feet, months of suppressed anger finally boiling over. "You mean the times where a woman can be sold to pay her father's debts, where children go hungry because their parents' land was stolen, where good men like Cole are accused of treason for saving lives?" She walked forward, past Cole's restraining hand, until she stood directly before Rockefeller. "You talk about progress like it's holy, but progress built on suffering isn't progress at all. It's just cruelty with better clothes." "Miss Quinn," Judge Roosevelt said gently, "do you have evidence to present?" "I have this." She pulled out a folded document. "A contract signed by Thomas Edison here, on behalf of Baron Rockefeller, purchasing water rights to the Northern Spring. The seller is listed as one William Shakespeare." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Edison paled. "That's perfectly legal," he started. "Except William Shakespeare has been dead for over 200 years, Rose continued. "Unless you'd like to explain how a long-dead English playwright sold water rights in New Mexico territory. That must be a clerical error. Like all the other clerical errors, the ones that always benefited your client." Rose turned to the judge. "But there's more. The man who actually signed as William Shakespeare, he's sitting right there." She pointed at Jesse James, who'd been brought in chains to testify. The former deputy's face went white. "She can't prove that," Edison protested. "Actually, I can." Benjamin Franklin stood up, holding his surveying equipment. "I've been teaching some of the children their letters, including Jesse here, who wanted to impress a girl by learning to write poetry. I have samples of his handwriting. Would you like to compare them to the signature on that contract?" The courtroom erupted. Judge Roosevelt banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. In the chaos, Rose saw Rockefeller lean over to whisper urgently to Edison, who shook his head and pushed back from the table. "I withdraw as counsel." Edison announced once quiet was restored. "I won't be party to—" "Sit down," Rockefeller snarled. "You're bought and paid for." "Not anymore." Edison looked at Rose with something like apology in his eyes. "I came here for opportunity, not to help steal from families and orphans. Find yourself another lawyer. Baron, I'm done." As Edison gathered his papers to leave, Judge Roosevelt turned his attention to the defendants. Mr. Rockefeller, would you care to explain these forged documents?" "I don't have to explain anything to a kangaroo court." Rockefeller spat. "I have connections in Washington. One word from me and—" "And what?" a new voice interrupted from the church doors. Everyone turned as a distinguished older man entered, accompanied by 2 federal marshals. "Please, Baron, finish that threat. I'm sure President Cleveland would be fascinated to hear how you plan to subvert federal justice." Rose recognized him from newspaper photographs. Senator George Washington, head of the Committee on Territories. "Senator," Rockefeller stammered, "I didn't expect—" "No, I imagine you didn't." Washington made his way to the front, nodding respectfully to Judge Roosevelt. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance. Your Honor, but when I received word of what was happening here, I felt it necessary to observe personally." "Word from whom?" Vanderbilt demanded. From me. Wild Bill Hickok said calmly. The senator and I go way back. He asked me to keep an eye on railroad development in the territories. Make sure it was done honest. Clearly, it wasn't, Washington said, surveying the evidence Florence had laid out. Baron Rockefeller, you've perverted the noble goal of connecting our nation into a scheme for personal enrichment. You've turned law enforcement into your private army and terrorized American citizens. He turned to address the crowd. The railroad will come to New Mexico territory. Progress is inevitable, but it will come honestly, with fair compensation and respect for the people who've made this land their home, not through theft and violence. Your Honor. Clara Barton spoke up. Before you pass judgment, there's something else the court should know. She moved forward, and Rose noticed she was holding a leather journal. I've been keeping records too, not of finances, but of injuries. Every person hurt by Los Mudos. Every family torn apart. Her voice grew thick with emotion. 23 people injured, some permanently. 4 dead, including a child caught in a burning house. That's the real cost of the Baron's progress. The church fell silent. Even the children seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. Abraham pressed closer to Grace, while Benedict's young face hardened with remembered loss. His own parents had died in one of those raids, before Cole took him in. There's one more piece of evidence, Rose said into the silence. She looked at Cole, who nodded encouragement. Baron Rockefeller didn't just steal land. He stole hope, made people believe they were powerless against money and influence. But he was wrong. She gestured around the packed church. Look at us, farmers and merchants, Anglos and Mexicanos, people who might never have spoken now standing together. We're stronger than his money, stronger than his threats. We're a community, and communities can't be bought or bullied into submission. Pretty words, Vanderbilt sneered. But power is power. You think one trial changes that? No, Cole said quietly. But it's a start. Every time someone stands up to corruption, it gets a little weaker. Every time a community chooses justice over fear, we all get a little stronger. Judge Roosevelt had heard enough. Baron Rockefeller, former Sheriff Vanderbilt, Jesse James, and all associates named in these proceedings, please rise. The defendants stood reluctantly. Rockefeller still trying to maintain his superior air despite the circumstances. The evidence presented here is overwhelming. Roosevelt continued. Fraud, extortion, conspiracy, and murder, though that last will require a separate trial. This court finds you guilty on all charges related to land fraud and conspiracy. The gavel came down with finality. The church erupted in cheers, quickly hushed by the judge's raised hand. Sentencing will be tomorrow. However, I can tell you now that all illegally seized properties will be returned to their rightful owners. All inflated tax assessments will be voided, and compensation will be paid from the defendant's assets to those who suffered losses. Hey, you can't do this, Rockefeller shouted as marshals moved to escort him out. I'll ruin all of you, His threats were cut short as the church doors burst open. A dust-covered rider stumbled in, nearly collapsing from exhaustion. Los Mudos, he gasped. The ones that got away, they're coming 50 riders, maybe more. They say if their bosses hang, they'll burn the whole town. Panic rippled through the crowd, but Cole's voice cut through it like a blade. How far out? 2 hours, maybe less. They're coming from the southern passes. Then we have time to prepare. Cole looked at Marshal Hickok. What do you say? Marshal feel like earning that federal pay? Hickok grinned. Wouldn't be the first time I've faced down outlaws. Though 50's a mite more than I prefer. You won't face them alone, Levi Strauss declared, standing. I may be a shopkeeper now, but I can still shoot straight. And me, Carl Benz added. Others stood throughout the church, men and women who'd been victims now ready to be defenders. This is madness, Edison said from where he'd paused by the door. You can't fight that many outlaws. Watch us, Rose said firmly. She turned to Florence. "Take the children to the root cellar behind the schoolhouse. It's reinforced, and there's water stored there." "I'm not hiding," June protested. "I can shoot as well as any, which is why you're our last line of defense," Rose interrupted, knowing the girl needed purpose. "If they get past us, the little ones will need protecting." June's eyes widened with understanding and pride. "I won't let anyone hurt them." "I know you won't." As the church emptied, people rushing to prepare defenses, Rose found herself momentarily alone with Cole. He pulled her close, his lips brushing her hair. "If something happens—" "Nothing will happen," she said fiercely. "We've come too far to lose now. Besides, you promised to marry me. I intend to hold you to that." He smiled, that rare, transformative expression that made him look years younger. "Then I guess I'd better survive. Wouldn't want to disappoint a lady." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Barricades rose across Main Street. Shooters positioned themselves on rooftops and in windows. The territorial soldiers Roosevelt had brought formed a defensive line at the town's entrance. Rose found herself on the church bell tower with a rifle, the highest point in town offering a clear view of the approaching dust cloud. Below, she could see Cole organizing the defense with Hickok, their combined experience turning frightened townspeople into something resembling a militia. "They're coming!" someone shouted. The riders appeared like a dark wave cresting the hill, but something was wrong. As they drew closer, Rose realized there weren't 50 riders, there were maybe 20, and they weren't attacking. They were fleeing. Behind them came another dust cloud, and from it emerged a sight that made Rose's heart leap. Apache warriors, riding hard and armed for war. At their head rode a figure she recognized from treaty negotiations she'd witnessed Geronimo himself. The Los Mudos riders, caught between the town's defenses and the Apache war party, milled in confusion. Several threw down their weapons immediately. "What in the name of—" Hickok muttered. Geronimo raised his hand, and his warriors stopped just outside rifle range. He rode forward alone, his face painted for war, but his posture peaceful. "We come to talk," he called in accented English. "These men burned our winter stores, killed 2 of our young hunters. We tracked them here." Cole stepped out from behind the barricade. Rose held her breath, knowing this moment balanced on a knife's edge. "They're our prisoners," Cole said carefully. "Already caught and waiting for trial." "White man's justice is slow," Geronimo observed. "Apache justice is certain." "Then let's combine them," a voice suggested. Senator Washington emerged from the church, Judge Roosevelt beside him. "Chief Geronimo, I'm authorized to negotiate on behalf of the United States government. What would satisfy Apache justice?" A long moment passed. The entire town seemed to hold its breath. "The men who ordered the burning," Geronimo said finally. "Let us witness their punishment, and compensation cattle to replace our lost stores." "Done," Washington said immediately. "The cattle will come from Rockefeller's seized assets, and you're welcome to witness the sentencing tomorrow." Geronimo considered, then nodded. "We will camp outside town tonight. Do not worry, we come in peace, now that agreement is reached." As the Apache withdrew to set up camp, the captured Los Mudos members were rounded up with little resistance. They seemed almost relieved to be facing territorial justice rather than Apache vengeance. "Well," Hickok said, pushing back his hat, "that's not how I expected this day to go. Nothing out here ever goes as expected." Cole replied, "That's what makes it interesting." That evening, the town celebrated with cautious joy. The immediate threat was over, but everyone understood that tomorrow would bring its own challenges. In the church, now serving as a jail, Rockefeller and his conspirators waited for judgment. Rose found herself back in the bell tower as the sun set, watching the Apache campfires spark to life on one side of town and the territorial soldiers' fires on the other. Between them, Silver Arroyo stood like something from a dream, a place where justice might actually prevail. where communities could unite against tyranny, where a barren woman could find a family and a cynical man could find hope. "Quite a view," Cole said, joining her in the narrow space. "Quite a day," she countered. "Think tomorrow will be calmer?" "In this town, doubtful." He wrapped his arms around her from behind. "But whatever comes, we'll face it together." "Together," she agreed, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Though next time, maybe with less gunfighting. I'll see what I can do, though you looked mighty fine up here with that rifle, like an avenging angel." "Flattery will get you everywhere, Mr. Maddox." "I'm counting on it. Future Mrs. Maddox." The church bell above them caught the last rays of sunlight, turning bronze to gold. Tomorrow it would ring for justice, as Rockefeller and his men faced their fate. Soon it would ring for a wedding, celebrating love found in the unlikeliest place. But tonight it was silent, watching over a town that had chosen to fight rather than flee, to stand rather than kneel. And in that silence, Rose heard something better than any bell, the sound of children laughing as they emerged from hiding, of neighbors sharing food and stories, of a community healing from wounds that had seemed insurmountable. "Listen," she told Cole. "That's the sound of winning." "No," he corrected gently. "That's the sound of home." And he was right, despite everything, because of everything Silver Arroyo had become home. Not just a place to survive, but a place to thrive. A place where broken people could become whole, where strangers could become family, where justice might be imperfect, but it was still worth fighting for. The stars emerged one by one, witnesses to all that had transpired, and Rose Quinn, soon to be Rose Maddox, teacher and mother and fighter for justice, knew that whatever tomorrow brought, she was exactly where she belonged. The trial was over. The real work of building a life, a family, a community that was just beginning. But with Cole's arms around her and their chosen children safe below, with friends who'd become warriors, and a town that had become a symbol of resistance, Rose felt ready for whatever came next. After all, she'd already survived the worst. Everything else was just another adventure. And Rose Quinn had developed quite a taste for adventure. The drought hadn't broken. 3 weeks after the trial, the land remained stubbornly dry, and the small victory garden behind the ranch house struggled despite Rose's careful tending. She knelt in the dusty soil, teaching Grace and Abraham how to channel precious water directly to the roots of their tomato plants. "Why won't they grow, Mama Rose?" Abraham asked, his small face scrunched with concern. "Growing takes time," Rose explained, helping him pat soil around a wilting stem. "And faith, even when we can't see it, the roots are working underground, getting stronger." Cole appeared from the barn, his shirt soaked with sweat from the morning's labor. With Rockefeller imprisoned and his assets frozen, they'd managed to keep the ranch, but money was still tight and water scarcer. Benedict found something. He said, "You'll want to see this." They followed him to the old well, the same one Abraham had gotten stuck in months ago. Benedict stood beside it with June, both looking excited. "Listen," Benedict said, dropping a pebble down the shaft. Instead of the usual distant thud of stone on stone, they heard a splash. "Water," June breathed. "The water table's rising." "It's not much," Benedict added quickly. "Maybe 3 feet at the bottom, but it wasn't there last week." Rose felt hope flutter in her chest. "We need to tell the others. If the water table's rising here, it might be rising elsewhere too." That afternoon, she led the children into town for their weekly lesson at the schoolhouse. With Florence still recovering from her accident, Rose had taken over teaching duties. The classroom was fuller than ever. Parents who'd once kept their children home to work now insisted they learn their letters. "Education is the best defense against men like Rockefeller," Clara Barton had said, and the community had taken it to heart. Today's lesson was interrupted by excited shouts from the street. Rose and the children rushed to the windows to see Carl Benz and several other men clustered around the town's main well. "Water!" Carl shouted, pulling up a bucket that actually held liquid instead of dust. "She's flowing again!" The children cheered and wanted to run out immediately, but Rose held them back. "Lessons first. The water will still be there when we're done." "But, Miss Rose," protested Marie Curie, the blacksmith's daughter. "This is historic. The drought might be ending." "Then let's be historic about our multiplication tables, too," Rose said firmly, though she was smiling. "History remembers the educated, not just the excited." After lessons, she let them investigate the well, where a small crowd had gathered. The water was muddy and barely a trickle, but after months of hauling barrels from the distant river, it seemed like a miracle. "We should organize," Levi Strauss was saying. "Dig irrigation channels while the ground's still soft from the trial rains last week. If we work together." "Who put you in charge?" demanded a voice from the back. Rose recognized Jacob Astor, who'd bought the Vanderbilt property at auction. He'd arrived from San Francisco 2 weeks ago with gold rush money and big city attitudes. "Nobody's in charge," Cole said evenly, having arrived with a wagon full of digging tools. "That's the point. We work together or we fail separately." "Very poetic," Astor sneered. "But I didn't buy land here to dig ditches like a common laborer." "Then you bought land in the wrong place," Florence said, limping up with her cane. "Out here, everybody works or everybody starves. Your choice." The tension was broken by Abraham tugging on Rose's skirt. "Mama Rose, I'm hungry." "Then let's go home and start supper." She raised her voice. "Anyone who wants to help dig tomorrow. We'll be starting at dawn at the old creek bed. Bring shovels and willing hands." That evening, as she served beans and cornbread to her family, Rose noticed Cole pushing food around his plate without eating. "What's troubling you?" He glanced at the children, then sighed. "Got a letter today. From the Army. They want me to testify at a hearing about the depot fire. Clear my record once and for all." "But that's wonderful," June said. "You could." She stopped, understanding dawning. "You'd have to leave." "For at least 2 months. Maybe 3. Cole looked at Rose. "I won't go. Not with the water situation so uncertain and—" "You'll go," Rose said firmly. "Rose." "Cole Maddox, you've carried that guilt for years. If there's a chance to clear your name properly, you take it." She softened her tone. "We'll manage. We always do." "I could come with you," Benedict offered eagerly. "Help with the horses on the trail." "You're needed here," Cole said gently. "You're the man of the house when I'm gone." "That's a big responsibility." Benedict straightened, pride and worry warring on his young face. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't." 2 days later, Rose stood with the children as Cole prepared to leave. He'd already said his private goodbye to her at dawn. Promises and kisses exchanged in the pale light. Now it was time for the public farewell. "You mind June," he told the little ones, "and mind Rose like she was." He stopped, corrected himself. "Mind Rose. She's your mother in all the ways that count." Abraham burst into tears and had to be comforted. Grace clung silently to Cole's leg until he knelt and whispered something that made her nod bravely. Benedict shook hands like a man. Though his lip trembled, June surprised everyone by hugging Cole fiercely. "You come back," she ordered. "We're finally a real family. Don't you dare mess that up." "I'll be back before you know it," he promised. But Rose saw the worry in his eyes as he rode away. They both knew how quickly things could change on the frontier. The first week went smoothly. Rose managed the ranch with June and Benedict's help, while continuing her teaching in town. The water table continued to rise slowly, and the community irrigation project began taking shape. It was Jacob Astor who caused the first real problem. He'd claimed a section of the old creek bed ran through his property, actually public land he was trying to appropriate, and refused to let the diggers through. Work around him, Clara suggested at an evening planning meeting. Can't, Carl Benz explained, pointing at a hand-drawn map. His section's the narrowest point, natural channel. Without it, the whole system fails. Rose studied the map. An idea forming. Mr. Astor's from San Francisco. Correct use to city contracts and legal documents. So perhaps we need to speak his language, she smiled. Florence, do you still have those old territorial surveys, the ones from before the railroad speculation started? Florence's eyes gleamed with understanding. I might remember that particular section being designated as a public waterway, legally protected from private ownership. That's not possible. Astor protested when confronted with the documents the next day. I bought that land fair and square. You bought the land adjacent to the waterway, Rose corrected. The creek bed itself remains public property. Says so right here in the Territorial Charter of 1846. This is ridiculous. That creek's been dry for years. But still legally protected. Of course, Rose added thoughtfully. We could work out an arrangement. Access to the irrigation system in exchange for allowing construction through public land you don't actually own. Astor's face flushed purple, but he was trapped by his own city-bred respect for legal documents. Fine, but I want first water rights when it's flowing. Third, Rose countered, behind the school and the church. Second, behind the school. Done. They shook hands, Rose hiding her satisfaction. She'd have given him first rights if necessary. The important thing was getting the channel dug. The work was backbreaking. Every able-bodied person in town took shifts, even Jacob Astor eventually rolling up his sleeves after the mockery became too much to bear. Rose worked alongside everyone else, her hands blistering and her back aching, but her heart light. You're good at this, Clara observed one afternoon, watching Rose mediate between two farmers arguing over channel depth. Leading, I'm just trying to keep things moving. No, it's more than that. Cole commands respect through strength. You do it through wisdom. Clara smiled. Together, you'll make formidable partners. That night, Rose was teaching June how to balance the ranch ledgers when Abraham came running in. Mama Rose, come see the garden. They hurried outside to find a miracle. The tomato plant they'd been nursing the saddest. Most stubborn of all their plantings had produced a single, perfect fruit, small and green-tinged, but unmistakably a tomato. The first one, Grace whispered reverently. June reached for it, but Rose stopped her. Not yet. Let it ripen. Let it show us what's possible. Word spread quickly. By morning, half the town had trooped by to see their tomato, as if it were a sign from above that their struggles weren't in vain. One tomato doesn't end a drought, Jacob Astor scoffed, though Rose noticed he looked as long as anyone. No, she agreed, but it reminds us why we're fighting. For the chance to grow things, to build something lasting. The irrigation channels were nearly complete when disaster struck. A flash flood in the distant mountains sent water roaring down the old creek bed before they were ready. The crude channels couldn't handle the flow, and water went everywhere except where it was needed. 3 weeks of work, ruined, someone moaned as they surveyed the damage. But Benedict was already sketching in the mud. No, look, the water showed us where it wants to go. We were fighting the natural flow. If we redirect here and here. By evening, they had a new plan. Better, stronger, following the land's own wisdom instead of imposing their will upon it. Even Astor admitted it was brilliant. Your boy's got a gift, he told Rose. Ever think of sending him east for engineering school? He's not my boy, Rose said automatically, then caught herself. Actually, yes, he is my boy. And he'll go to school if he wants, when he's ready. But he'll learn here first, from the land and the people who work it. 2 nights later, A rider arrived with a telegram. Rose's hands shook as she read Cole's brief message. Hearing delayed. Military bureaucracy. Maybe another month. All my love. She forced herself to smile as she shared the news with the children. But June saw through her immediately. We'll be fine, the girl said firmly. We've got each other. And they did. When Los Mudos remnants tried to raid the Schultz farm, it was Rose who organized the defense, riding out with the other women while the men were working on the channels. The raiders fled when faced with a dozen armed mothers and grandmothers protecting their community. Never thought I'd see the day, Florence mused afterward. Rose Quinn leading a cavalry charge. Rose Maddox, she corrected quietly. Or will be, when Cole returns. You already are, Florence said, in every way that matters. The tomato ripened slowly, watched over like a treasured jewel. Other plants began showing buds, peppers, beans, even a few stalks of corn fighting through the dusty soil. The irrigation channels filled and held, bringing precious water to fields that had been barren for months. One evening, as Rose tucked Abraham into bed, he asked, "What if Papa Cole doesn't come back?" The question she'd been dreading, voiced with a child's directness. He'll come back. But what if he doesn't? Rose sat on the edge of his bed, choosing her words carefully. Then we'll keep going. We'll take care of each other, grow our garden, help our neighbors. We'll make him proud even from far away. But Abraham, he will come back, he promised, and Cole Maddox keeps his promises. Like you do. Like I do. Abraham seemed satisfied with that, falling asleep clutching his wooden soldier. Rose stayed a moment longer, watching him breathe, this child who called her mama and meant it. Outside, June was writing in the journal she'd started keeping. For posterity, she'd said, only half joking. Someone should record how we saved ourselves. What are you writing tonight? June looked up, her young face serious in the lamplight. About you, about how you came here broken and afraid, and became the strongest person I know. I'm not strong, June, I'm just too stubborn to quit. Same thing, isn't it? June smiled. I wrote about the tomato too. How something so small can mean so much. How hope grows in the hardest ground. Rose kissed her forehead. You're the writer. You'll tell our story better than anyone. Our story's not finished yet, June said. The best part's still coming. Looking out at their small kingdom, the ranch house with its mended roof, the barn full of healthy horses, the garden fighting toward life, the distant lights of town where their neighbors worked and hoped and refused to give up. Rose believed her. The drought was ending, one drop at a time. The community was healing, one shared labor at a time, and she was becoming the woman she was meant to be, one choice at a time. Cole would return to find everything changed and nothing different. The ranch still struggled. The children still needed raising. The town still faced challenges from men like Astor who didn't understand that cooperation meant survival. But now they had water and tomatoes and the unshakable knowledge that they could endure whatever came next. Rose Quinn, the barren woman who'd arrived with nothing but shame, had become the heart of a family and a community. Not through birth, but through choice. Not through perfection, but through persistence. And that first tomato, when they finally harvested it, tasted like victory itself. The locomotive's whistle echoed across the valley like a mechanical rooster announcing a new dawn. Rose stood with the rest of the town, watching the iron horse chug along the elevated track that curved around the hillside a full 5 miles from Silver Arroyo's main street. The railroad had come at last, but not as Baron Rockefeller had envisioned. Still think it's ugly, June muttered, adjusting her new dress. At 15, she'd shot up like a weed and developed opinions about everything. Ugly or not, it's bringing guests, Rose reminded her. Now remember, Grace is in charge of the guest book. Benedict handles the music. And Abraham. I know, Ring the bell when it's time." The boy, now 7 and proud of his responsibility, clutched the rope attached to the church bell like a lifeline. It had been 2 years since Cole returned from his military hearing. His name cleared and his conscience lighter. 2 years of building, growing, and fighting new battles with bureaucrats instead of outlaws. The federal investigation had revealed the extent of Rockefeller's corruption, forcing the railroad to reroute around the water sources the community had fought to protect. "There he is." Grace pointed to where Cole stood with Marshal Hickok and the other men, all cleaned up and looking uncomfortable in their Sunday best. "Handsomest man in the territory," Rose murmured, smoothing her own dress, a simple blue cotton that Clara had helped her make. Nothing fancy, but it was new and it was hers, bought with money from the school teaching job the town council had officially offered her. "You ready for this, Miss Rose?" Florence asked, leaning heavily on her cane but eyes bright with pleasure, as the town's only person authorized to perform civil ceremonies. She'd insisted on officiating despite her age. "I've been ready since the day he paid my father's debts." Rose admitted, "Just took us a while to get here." The church bell rang. Abraham pulling the rope with all his might, the clear bronze notes carried across the valley, reaching the workers laying track, the farmers in their fields, the Apache trading post that had sprung up after the trial. All of Silver Arroyo was invited to this wedding, and it seemed all had come. Inside the church, sunflowers blazed from every corner the children had insisted on decorating with the flowers that now grew wild along their irrigation channels. The pews were packed, leaving barely room to walk down the aisle. Cole waited at the altar, his weathered face transformed by joy. Beside him, Benedict stood as groomsman, trying to look older than his 12 years. The Schultz boys, who Cole had hired to help with the expanded ranch, flanked them with matching grins. Rose walked alone, no one to give her away because she was giving herself freely and with full knowledge of what she chose. The whispers that had once followed her had transformed too. Now they spoke of the woman who'd helped save their town, who taught their children, who'd shown them that families were built on love, not blood. "Dearly beloved," Florence began, her voice carrying surprising strength. "We gather today to witness something that's already true, the joining of two people who've been partners in every way that matters." Rose barely heard the traditional words. She was lost in Cole's eyes, in the small smiles from their children, in the incredible journey that had brought her here. When Florence asked for the rings, it was Grace who produced them simple bands Benedict had helped forge at the blacksmith's. Nothing fancy, but made with their own hands. "Rosalie Quinn," Florence said, "do you take this man as your husband, to stand beside him in drought and plenty, in trials and victories, in all the unpredictable adventures this territory might bring?" "I do," Rose said firmly. "Though I've been standing beside him so long, this just makes it official." Gentle laughter rippled through the congregation. "And Cole Maddox, do you take this woman as your wife to honor her strength, support her dreams, and never again pay another person's debts without discussing it first?" More laughter, louder this time. Cole grinned. "I do, except maybe that last part. Man's got to keep some surprises." Then, by the authority vested in me by the territory of New Mexico and the stubborn refusal of this town to get a proper preacher, I pronounce you husband and wife. Florence's eyes twinkled. "You may kiss your bride, Cole, though Lord knows it's not the first time." The kiss was sweet and brief, mindful of their audience. But the cheer that erupted could have been heard in Santa Fe. Abraham rang the bell with enthusiasm, while Benedict and the boys whooped like cowboys. June tried to maintain her dignity, but ended up crying anyway, which set off Grace and half the women in attendance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Florence announced, "may I present Mr. and Mrs. Cole Maddox and their beautiful family." That's when Rose felt it the full weight of belonging, not just to Cole, but to all of them, to this place that had tested and shaped her, to these people who'd stood together against corruption and drought, to the future they were building one day at a time. The celebration spilled out of the church into the street. Tables groaned under the weight of shared dishes. Everyone had contributed something. Even Jacob Astor, who'd surprised them all by donating cases of wine from California. "Don't get used to it," he grumbled when thanked. "But a man only gets married once. Or in your case, Maddox, hopefully, only once." Thomas Edison had sent a letter of congratulations from Austin, where he'd established a practice defending homesteaders against land speculators. "You were right," he'd written to Rose. "There are different kinds of success. I'm finding mine. Be happy in yours." As the sun began to set, painting the mountains purple and gold, the party showed no signs of slowing. Carl Benz had brought out his fiddle, joined by others, and couples danced in the dust of Main Street. Children ran between the adults' legs, playing tag and sneaking extra desserts. "Oh, look at that," Clara said, joining Rose where she sat catching her breath. 6 months ago, we barely had water for drinking. Now we're dancing in the street like we don't have a care in the world." "We've got plenty of cares," Rose corrected. "We've just learned they're easier to bear together." She gestured toward the new schoolhouse going up beside the church, the expanded general store, the fresh paint on the hotel that served railroad passengers. "Change is still coming. The railroad brings opportunities, but also challenges. There'll be new people, new ideas, new conflicts, but also new chances." Clara pointed out, "That young doctor from Chicago who's setting up practice, he says more families are looking to settle here. Real families, not speculators." Cole appeared, holding out his hand. "Mrs. Maddox, may I have this dance?" "Always," she answered, letting him pull her into the circle of dancers. They moved together with the ease of long partnership, aware of but not performing for their audience. Around them, their community celebrated the merchants who'd risked Rockefeller's wrath, the farmers who'd shared precious water, the women who'd taken up arms to defend their neighbors, the children who'd learned that courage came in many forms. "No regrets?" Cole asked as they turned. "Only one," Rose admitted. "I wish we'd done this sooner. Had to happen in its own time. Like that first tomato, some things can't be rushed." "Speaking of which," Rose glanced toward their garden plot, now a small farm that helped feed half the town. "June's been drawing up plans for a proper greenhouse. She thinks we could grow year-round with the right structure." "That girl's going to change the world someday." "She already has. They all have." Rose looked at their children, June deep in conversation with Florence about women's suffrage, Benedict explaining water flow to anyone who'd listen, Grace teaching the younger girls a clapping game, Abraham conducting serious negotiations over marbles with the other boys. "We did all right by them," Cole said softly. "We did, and they did all right by us." Marshal Hickok approached as the song ended, tipping his hat. "Ma'am, Maddox. Fine party. Wanted to let you know I'll be moving on come morning." "So soon?" Rose asked, though she wasn't surprised. Men like Wild Bill didn't stay in one place long. "Work's done here. Town's got proper law now. Honest folk in charge. There's trouble brewing in Dakota Territory needs looking into." He smiled. "Besides, I stay much longer and Florence'll have me married off to some widow woman. That lady's got matchmaking in her blood." They laughed, knowing it was true. Florence had already paired 3 couples since the trial, with more in her sights. As if summoned by thought, Florence appeared with Senator Washington, who'd returned for the wedding. "Rose, the senator's been telling me about new federal programs for rural education. Seems they're looking for qualified teachers to train others." "I'm happy where I am," Rose said quickly. "Of course you are," Washington agreed. "That's why we'd bring the training here. Make Silver Arroyo a model for frontier education. If you're interested. That is." Before Rose could respond, a commotion arose near the church. Someone was shouting, voices raised in alarm rather than celebration. "Fire!" The cry went up. "Fire in the hills!" Everyone turned to see orange light flickering against the darkening sky. But Cole relaxed almost immediately, a smile playing at his lips. "That's no wildfire," he said. "That's a signal fire. Apache custom. A blessing on the wedding." Sure enough, Geronimo himself appeared at the edge of town, accompanied by a small honor guard. He dismounted and approached Cole with dignity. "We bring gifts," he announced, gesturing to pack horses laden with beautifully woven blankets and pottery. "For the woman who speaks truth and the man who keeps his word, may your union be as strong as the mountains." The gifts were presented with ceremony, each piece representing hours of skilled work. Rose accepted them with the gravity they deserved, knowing this gesture meant more than any treaty. It was personal recognition, human to human. "Will you stay?" she asked. "Join our celebration." Geronimo considered, then nodded. "For a time, your joy honors the land we share." And so the party expanded again, Apache drums joining frontier fiddles in a music that had never been heard before but somehow sounded right. Children who'd been taught to fear now watched in fascination as Apache boys demonstrated traditional dances. Old warriors shared drinks with former soldiers, finding common ground in their scars. "Now that," Florence said with satisfaction, "is what I call progress. Real progress, not Rockefeller's version." As midnight approached, Rose found herself back on the church steps where this long day had begun. The party continued around her, but she needed a moment of stillness to absorb it all. "There you are," Cole said, sitting beside her. "Overwhelmed." "Grateful," she corrected. "Grateful and amazed and—" She searched for words. "Full? That's it. I feel full." He understood. For so long, she'd defined herself by what was empty: her womb, her future, her prospects. Now she overflowed with abundance of a different kind. "I have something for you," he said, producing a wrapped package. "Wedding present." Inside was a leather journal, beautifully tooled with roses along the spine. The first page bore an inscription in Cole's careful hand. "For Rose Maddox, who grows miracles in impossible ground. Write our story." "June's been keeping the record so far," Rose said, touched beyond words. "This is for your story, the one only you can tell." She kissed him then, not caring who saw. Let them see. Let the whole territory know that Rose Maddox, formerly Quinn, had found her place and her people and her purpose. The church bell rang one final time. Abraham couldn't resist, and the sound carried across the valley to where the railroad track curved around the hill. Tomorrow, the train would bring new challenges and changes. The drought might return. Conflicts would arise. Children would grow and leave and break their parents' hearts with their courage. But tonight, in a frontier town that had refused to surrender, a woman who'd been told she was barren presided over an abundant life. She had a husband who saw her truly, children who called her mother, and a community that had become family. "I know what I'll write first," she told Cole. "What's that?" "That endings are just beginnings in disguise, and this—" She gestured at their celebrating town, their sleeping children, their shared future. "This is the best beginning of all." The train whistle sounded in the distance, not a threat now, but a promise. The world was coming to Silver Arroyo, but Silver Arroyo was ready. They'd fought for their water, their land, their way of life. They'd won more than they'd lost and learned that victory meant standing together. Rose Maddox closed her new journal, saving its pages for tomorrow's thoughts. Tonight was for dancing, for laughter, for holding her family close and marveling at the strange, wonderful journey that had brought her home. The desert roses were blooming all along the irrigation channels now, hardy flowers that thrived where others couldn't survive. Perfect symbols for the life she'd built, not the one she'd planned, but the one she'd needed. And as Cole led her back to the dance, their children racing to join them, Rose knew with certainty that the best stories weren't about perfection. They were about choosing love, again and again, until it bloomed even in the driest ground. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed following Rose and Cole's journey through the trials and triumphs of frontier life, please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to connect it and hear your thoughts about their adventure. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit the like button. And if this tale touched your heart, please press the hype button to help more people discover this story of love, courage, and community in the American West.